in a way, for what you call liberals, what we might call in Australia Greens, to so pursue energy policies because of their concerns about climate, that they place at risk the liberal global order and increase the chances of us tipping over into a world that's dominated by authoritarianism. That would be the worst possible outcome for everyone, including people worried about climate, I would have thought, because there's no evidence that the Chinese or the Russians give tuppenny about emissions. Not really.
No, we know that Russia in the past has subsidized green groups in the West. They love green groups, and the Chinese have as well. And, I think you summed it up pretty well. Tonight is the President's State of the Union address in a few hours, and he's got a big problem because his green energy protocols, which override pragmatism, and it's a war on fossil fuels, the open border, the inflationary new modern monetary theory policies, the Afghanistan, the woke movement, the politicalization of the military. Now they're not domestic issues anymore, John. They have foreign policy ramifications, as we see in Ukraine. So the American people are saying, wait a minute, if our border is open and 2 million people invaded, how do we have the intellectual heft or integrity to go over there and say to the Ukrainians, you've got to secure your border? If we have this inflationary policy and we're printing 2 trillion a year and we have 30 trillion in debt, how can we engage in a successful financial war with China or Russia, who have surpluses? If we are begging Putin for energy and Europe is dependent on his gas and oil, and he's rich in petrodollars that are flowing in the billions every day with this increased price. Why are we deliberately not using the resources we have that are greater than either Russia's or China's? And if we want to have a military that deters people like Putin, why do we get out of Afghanistan the way we did? Why is Mark Milley, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, saying that our existential threats are the twins of climate change and white rage, or Lloyd Austin, our defense secretary, saying white supremacy, rather than battlefield efficacy being our prime consideration, and cutting the defense budget under his first budget, Biden suggested we cut the defense budget. So what I'm getting at is that this woke, green, whatever we want to call it, initiative that's not unique to the United States has, I think you are suggesting, it has foreign policy ramifications. It weakens the West. And when you start to collate what the Chinese and the Russians say, it's pretty clear that they like what we're doing to ourselves. And they say that we're decadent, we're too affluent, we're too pudgy. They have all different mechanisms and metaphors and similes, but we as conservatives have to be very, very careful, because we know that what they are saying, there's truth to it, but we don't want to, in agreement with them by any mechanism or means or any methods, suggest that therefore, because they're right that we're in a cannibalistic mode, they have a right to take advantage of it. I think a lot of conservatives will say, well, we're decadent and Putin was right. We've destroyed our deterrence. Putin was right. It's none of our business. Let him go in there, and that'll show everybody what happens. And, maybe there won't be pride flags and George Floyd murals, at least in Ukraine. Well, that's the wrong attitude. We've got to find a mechanism to say, yes, Putin and China saw how weak we are, but we're going to go full bore and correct those vulnerabilities and deter them. It's sort of like during World War World War II in the United States, we had the America First, but we were there was a lot of isolationism. But after Pearl Harbor, the criticism, there were two types of isolationists. There were the people who said, we warned you that you were kind of a socialistic country and you were not, and they were incorporated into really the leading spokesman of war against Japan. And then there were the Charles Lindbergh people who said, we don't want to get involved, and they became irrelevant. And so I think conservatives have to not confuse what's at stake. It reminds me, it's the foreign policy here in this country, John, it's the foreign policy equivalent of the rancor over the election. We all know that in 2020, the laws in the key states that determine the electoral college outcome were altered, and they were altered in an unconstitutional fashion by court edict and bureaucratic fiat against the constitutional prerogatives of state legislatures who had laws. And the result was we had 102 million ballots for the first time. 64% were mailed in or early voting. We've never had that before. The error rate went down, and that was catastrophic for Trump. But I don't think you can make the argument from that, oh, well, the ballots were rigged or the computers were communicating with China, kind of a Sidney Powell, Linwood, Kraken. And to do that and say, well, on election day, all the computers were these it weakened that legitimate criticism. So I hope that conservatives in their anger at how we've been warped by wokeness and political correctness don't let that anguish channel into sort of well, let Putin do what he wants, or at least he's Christian or something like that. We've got to be very careful, I think.